This podcast is recorded on the traditional and unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh, and Coquitlam peoples.
British Columbia, I've seen your mountains high, seen your pretty rainbows and your blue crystal skies, watched your winding rivers as they flow around the bend. To me you're not a stranger, you'll always be a friend.
Coming to you from the West Coast, this is Blitzos. Today is August 14th, 2025. I'm Scott Luneboom, and joining me is Ryan Clayton.
Hello.
Ryan, welcome back to the pod.
Thanks for having me. It was about a year ago that I was last on here, so I'm enjoying this summer tradition of popping on for a cameo appearance.
Yeah, well, it's good to have you. So just for the listeners, a little bit of your background. You used to work for the BC Green Party before kind of stepping away from the professional side of politics.
Yeah, so I got involved in the prior to the 2017 election, but my first actual staff position was in 2017. I was involved with the Green Party Vancouver in 2018 when we had our pretty big breakthrough there. I even went to Ontario briefly, and then more recently I've stepped back. I'm planning on going back to school and getting a master's starting this fall. So that is a huge change in my life, but I'm excited, and I think it's about that time in my life when I'm thinking about higher education and long-term career plans. So it's been a shift. I do miss it sometimes, but it's fun to come and talk about it now as an outsider looking in instead of an insider trying to make sense of it all.
Yeah, and you also have a Substack where you cover some of this stuff too.
I do, yeah. The way I've tried to remain involved is by writing a weekly Substack blog, which thank you to both you and Ian. You shout me out once in a while, which I really appreciate, and I hope any of your listeners who have found it interesting or engaging or at least entertaining.
Right, and yeah, we'll throw a link in the show notes for that one. But yeah, in terms of content for today's show, we're going to be talking about the BC Green leadership race, such as it is. Plus, we'll look at a couple of the items in the news, but it's been a slow news week, as is pretty typical for middle of August.
Yeah, everyone's outside in their gardens and enjoying the last bit of sunshine. I think you guys chatting about the green race has probably been the most coverage they've gotten so far, so I'm sure they appreciate it.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting on that bit. We'll dive into that in a moment, but first, you can support the show and get access to our patron Slack, where we get to discuss all of this and more by going to patreon.com/Blitzos. So let's jump into this. You mentioned off the top that it kind of seems like there's not a lot of coverage on this. I was digging through some news stories, or what I could try and find for that, and it was basically just here are your candidates story that came out when those were first announced. You don't see a lot else going on, at least in the traditional media for this leadership race.
Yeah, it's definitely been very quiet, and it's been very quiet all the way through. So the leadership race launched in February, and really that was the last you heard much from the party about it until they announced the candidates in July. It was a bit surprising because I certainly had thought that there would be a lot more momentum and interest, and at the very least people throwing up a trial balloon of, hey, I might be running, I'm thinking about it, I'm hoping to, maybe a leak or two here or there, but there was just silence. And then they announced all very suddenly, here are your three candidates, go.
Yeah, kind of once the formal green lighting process had gone through, which is kind of weird, isn't it? Because almost all the time, even before someone officially gets in the race, or the party approves them as a candidate, you'll hear rumors of it. There'll be like I said, trial balloons, soft launches. There'll be, even if it's not the candidate themselves, going out and posting something on social media or making a video or something. There's at least someone in their orbit starts putting their name out, tries to get a little buzz, and there's really just none of that in the entire lead up, which is interesting and fascinating as kind of just a way to run a leadership race, because it is not the traditional way to do it, both for the party, but also for the candidates.
Yeah, I was comparing it back to, and we haven't actually had a lot of leadership races in BC because the last two NDP leaders have been acclaimed, and BC United had one, but that went sideways after Kevin Falcon won it. When I was
acclaimed with an asterisk.
Yeah.
One of those.
When I was looking back, in the BC Liberal leadership, when Gordon Campbell stepped down, and of course this was someone who is now running for premier, so there was a higher stakes to it. It was days before people announced, barely the ink was barely dry on his resignation before there were names being put forward. Similar with the NDP when Carol James stepped down, there was at least a bit of a grace period of maybe 2 weeks, but then there were names and people were coming out, at least floating the idea that they were going to be running. And then this one, there were months and months where there was just silence. And part of that could be that there were fairly restrictive provisions in the rules that the party could red light someone if they announced that they were planning on running before they had been approved to run. But even then, that's something that, I don't think the party's going to red light a good candidate just because they told their neighbor who accidentally leaked it.
Yeah, well, not only that, you didn't see the people where there was plausible deniability from the candidate on the announcement. Nobody in any of their orbits were, soft launching them by just talking about their potential leadership race.
Yeah, and I had actually heard a couple names of, this person is interested, this person's looking into it, and then when the names of the candidates were announced, they were all new to me, except for Bremner Akins, but that was for a completely different reason, which you guys have mentioned on the show before. Someone kept editing Wikipedia to add him as a potential candidate.
Which is the closest we got to anyone trying to get their name out ahead of time.
It was a leak, and it was true. He was planning on running, but I do think it's funny that for about 2 weeks there, he was the only name I knew for sure was running, and it was because of Wikipedia, a war in Wikipedia editing, because someone kept adding the name, and then people pointed out there was no source for it, and so deleted it, and then it added it back on, deleted it. Petty me thinks it was Bremner Akins himself doing it, but I have no proof of that.
That would be my guess too, but like I said, we don't know for sure. But since you mentioned it, he's one of the candidates. Who are the others that are in the race, and what can you tell us about them?
Yeah, so Adam Bremner Akins is the one I just mentioned, and he was a former party secretary. He has run twice in the Coquitlam area for the Greens. The other candidates are Emily Lowen, who's a student and a anti-fossil fuel organizer, and then Jonathan Kerr, who is a doctor in Comox and also an elected Comox city councillor. So those are the three candidates.
And kind of what's your general impression of each of them? So
I think that there's sort of two candidates that I think are very much the two wings of the party, and then with respect to Adam, because I do know him and he's a great guy, and then I think he's sort of the third candidate in the mix that we'll see how he does. But there, I think Jonathan Kerr, I should say, it's not Kerr, it's Kerr, Jonathan Kerr. He seems to be sort of representing the party institution. His endorsements are two former leaders, including Adrian Carr, a few names that I recognize as just people who've been around for quite a while. And when I look through his platform on his website, it's exactly what you'd expect from a green candidate. I'm going to oppose fossil fuels. The cost of living is too high. I was sort of interested reading through his why I'm running, in that he didn't answer the question. It was like, the cost of living's too high. We need to address the climate crisis. But there was no reason as to why he specifically was putting his name forward. It was just sort of the list of all the things that we know affect British Columbians. So I sort of see him as, he seems to be sort of the institutional candidate. He's the one that would be a continuation of the organization as it has been so far. Ms. Lowen is sort of the opposite of that. She's sort of the fire starter who wants to push the party to be something more of an activist type organization that it has been in the past. And so she's coming at it. I think her tagline is like, fight the oligarchs. Which I think is interesting because I'd love to hear the names of what British Columbia oligarchs she's planning on taking on.
Yeah, hers is an interesting one because it doesn't feel all that green. Like, it feels much more at home in kind of populist left area territory rather than something that is the more kind of distinctly green space that the Green Party occupies that doesn't like easily slot into the simple left-right.
Yeah, and I think that's reflected a bit in her endorsements. Like, one of them was Anjali Appadurai, who sort of brought a similar approach to the NDP leadership before she was vetted out. So, some of her other endorsements are like Severin Cullis Suzuki, some Indigenous leaders. She does have Michael Wiebe, who was an elected Vancouver city councillor.
It doesn't come from like that side of the spectrum as far as I can tell.
Yeah, so it's like, I think she's got an interesting coalition, and I think her coalition that seems to be building up would be sort of a new pathway for the Green Party, which I think is going to be a challenge because she's ultimately pitching to Green Party members. And, like we said, there wasn't a lot of interest in the race. They also had a quick turnaround between when they announced the candidates and the cutoff, which was last weekend, to become a member. So her message is one that I think resonates with a lot of British Columbians, but she has to win the leadership from Green Party members. And the question is whether they're going to go with a new sort of a bit of a different path than what they have before. Her policy positions do seem to align with Green values. A lot of the things she said, maybe she's saying them a little stronger, but they're similar positions to what Mr. Kerr is saying. Or are party members going to go with the person that Adrian Carr has endorsed, that is, from Vancouver Island, where he has a strong, there's a strong base. He was elected as a Green in their city council in Comox. And that would be sort of a continuing the path that the party was already on. And then, of course, there's Adam. And Adam seems to be running more of a quieter campaign, and that may also just be resources. But he's on the Lower Mainland, and what he seems to be really running on is that he's already been in leadership positions in the party. And this real credit to him. He's the one who has run provincially. Neither of the other two have. He's the one who served in party roles. Neither of the other two have. He has really put himself forward as like, I am the institutional continuation of the last 4 years. And I think the question I would sort of put to him on that is, he was in a leadership position over the last 4 years when they had repeatedly poor results in by-elections and diminishing fundraising and failed to bring forward enough candidates to be represented in enough, in my opinion, enough ridings around the province to be serious. So if he was in that leadership position during that time, what was happening? How did that happen? And really, what would he do differently if he had the title now? If that's his pitch, if his pitch is, I've been in the leadership position, okay, what will you do differently with the title now?
Right. Yeah, that certainly seems to be a kind of important question, because the Greens kind of underperformed where they were expected to in last election. The trajectory of the party's not been great. They've lost seats, and the coalition seems to have shrunk slightly compared to the Weaver First to Now days.
And that has been consistent with other Green parties across Canada too, so it's not unique to British Columbia, but it really does seem like the Green Party's moment was about 8 years ago. And whatever work it took to capitalize on that doesn't seem to have taken place. The PEI Greens were almost the government. They were only a few seats away from it. Now they're back down to 2 seats now. I think they have 3 now. I think they won in a by-election, but they're back down to the third party in PEI. The The BC Greens obviously had the balance of power in a majority. They held that in a snap election in the middle of the pandemic, and then they lost half their vote share. And the leader lost her seat. Federally, of course, the party went from doing fairly well, getting 3 people elected in one election, to losing half their vote share and then losing half of it again. Even Elizabeth May's seat was considered not a safe seat in the last federal election. So the federal party really has imploded.
And what do you think it is that caused the Green Party to peak and like captured the moment of about a decade to half a decade ago, and kind of is no longer speaking to the moment?
Yeah, I think actually that's a really great phrasing of speaking to the moment, because I think, especially in 2017, with the NDP and the Liberal Party in British Columbia being so evenly matched, and the Green Party was able to say, hey, we're going to speak to the things that they're not talking about. And a big one was the Banning Big Money campaign I remember when I was getting involved in 2017, that was the one that you could talk to almost anyone on the doorstep about. And even if they weren't interested in voting Green, they go, yeah, I like that. Like, that responds to one of my big concerns in this election. So I think the Greens did a really good job in that election of speaking to what people were looking for in that election. They wanted to break from the two parties, and they wanted to see something that would affect both of them. They wanted to see a change that would make both of them kind of stop and reevaluate how they were operating. And by electing Greens, that kind of did that. Getting the 3 Greens in there, Banning Big Money being one of the first initiatives that they undertook, really did reframe it. And then I'm not sure the Greens kept up to the moment. I think they kept saying the same messaging, the same lines, and as time went on, they didn't. And I think, by the time we saw the next leader, she said a lot of things that I would agree with, but it was the same lines as from the last election over and over again. And I think federally, they got their window, especially with fires and with the climate crisis, and then they demonstrated very quickly they didn't have the organizational capacity to deliver. The wins that they had seemed to be very hyper-local organizations that delivered it for the party. And then the targets of the party, which I think Victoria is probably the one that the Greens keep targeting Victoria over and over again, and they keep not winning it. And I really question the wisdom of continually targeting a seat they keep not winning.
Yeah, I mean, I could see the logic in that a bit. You have the adjacent seat in Elizabeth May's riding, start a South Island beachhead and work off of that. But it does seem like the Sea to Sky might be the actual better play for them, trying to recreate what they've done provincially over there.
Yeah, I think when Green parties succeed is when they behave particularly courageously, and that includes, I think one of the reasons Elizabeth May ultimately won Sandwich Gulf Islands was because she looked like she could win in Nova Scotia. She didn't. She was defeated by Peter MacKay, but she got 30% of the vote, and she had made it clear that that was not an easy seat. She was running against a popular Harper cabinet minister. I'm not sure if he was in cabinet at the time, but she was running against a popular, the MacKay last name, and she really showed her viability, and that set her up to then win in Sandwich Gulf Islands. Whereas I think what we saw in the last provincial election was the leader had a seat, and then maybe looked at the polling numbers and went, "Oh no, I'm gonna chase the safe option," and the safe option is where she was defeated.
Yeah, MacKay was in cabinet at that time.
Okay, yeah.
Double check, yeah. Yeah, he was a Minister of Foreign Affairs and Minister of National Defense between 2006 and 2013.
Yeah, and that's sort of it takes some courage to take on a cabinet minister of that stature. And Elizabeth May did ultimately beat the Environment Minister, Gary Lunn. So that was I think Green parties do their best when they are seen to be the courageous party, and when they make safe choices, or when they waffle a little bit and say no, we're going to be the, we're going to be the, even the voice of reason, just doesn't inspire people.
Yeah, although that was my riding for a long time. That's where I grew up, and I have to say, Gary Lunn, I don't think struck anybody as an environmentalist. So the Minister of Environment thing, I don't think that did him a huge amount of favors on that one.
I think he was in community or like sport and cultural development by the time he was defeated, but I always remember him as being the environment minister that got beaten by the Greens.
Right. Well, circling back to the BC Green Party here, what are kind of the big issues that are dominating the debate? We kind of talked a little bit about what differentiates the candidates in terms of their like overall pitch and brand, but are they actually coming out and really exchanging blows and having a debate over the issues?
I haven't really seen a lot of difference. Like I mentioned before, Lowen and Kerr have sort of some differences in how forceful their language is, but their ultimate positions are very similar. I think a huge issue that they're going to have to deal with is how do they get the things they care about to be on the discussion, the discourse of the province. Because right now the Greens are largely out of the conversation. If anything is happening, it's the Conservatives that are talking about it, the NDP, maybe they'll interview like one of the third parties, and usually it's Centre or 1BC, not the Greens. So the Greens are really out of the conversation right now. So how do they pick their issues and get them back so that that's what people are talking about? It's all great to tweet a bunch of things or post on social media that you care about something, but how do you actually get that message to be the conversation? And that's going to be the barrier that they're running up against, is that this has been a very quiet race thus far. They're talking about issues, but no one's picking it up, which tells me that they maybe don't have the connections or the deep, involvement in BC media to get their message out in the first place. And that's the first barrier they have to overcome.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting kind of comparing this to the last leadership race, because everybody knew that Sonia First Now was going to win that one. There was really no
it was close.
Was it actually? I can't remember.
In the end, it was
results.
Close. It was very close in the end. More closer than anyone expected it to be.
Right. But yeah, the ultimate result ended up kind of where everyone expected it. I think she was the overwhelming presumptive favorite going in. And yet there's like quite a bit of energy in that leadership race, for at least for a party that size that was in third place but held the balance of power. This one here, it seems to be a lot different. And some of that might just be the changing phase of the media landscape. Just from experience, I can tell you between like 2018 and 2022, just like trying to get coverage for like the Vancouver local elections, night and day. Like the media had disappeared almost between those two races. So like that's could be part of it, but like this one seems very low energy, quiet, not getting out there. And I guess social media is changing too. Tweeting's probably increasingly just shouting into a void. Doesn't have the same ability to influence the conversation it once did, and like the fragmentation out into the other competitive Twitter knockoffs or similar to Twitter ones. None of them have hit a critical mass. Like, could be part of that too, but I don't know. Just has a very different energy to it, and I'm not entirely sure why that is, but it is very notable. Yeah,
well, and of course Facebook still doesn't allow news to be posted, so if there is news coverage, you're not going to see it on your Facebook page. I think that is very much a part of it, is it has changed. And again, kind of going back to meeting the moment, if the future leader of the Green Party really wants to be successful and see the party grow, they need to figure out how to tap into the discourse, even if it's fractured, even if it's way harder than it ever was. They need to find a way, because that will be their job. And so, the fact that none of them are able to break through right now in this environment, when it's hopefully people are starting to pay attention, that means that that's a skill they're going to have to develop very quickly if they are the successful candidate.
Yeah, none of them come from a background that has a lot of shown ability or past history on that one that really leans into it too.
Yeah, even actually on that note, one of Adam Brenner-Aiken's big things that he's posted about on social media is that, he once tweeted at John Horgan, and John Horgan backtracked like a week later. And I kind of
oh, that's pretty weak, man.
I looked at that. Yeah, that was his like leading without the title. And I kind of looked at that and I went, that's not meeting. That's not today's need.
Probably wasn't even then's need.
Yeah.
Yeah, if it takes a week to change direction, it probably was not your tweet that caused it.
Oh, I mean, like, that was when John Horgan basically accused young people of ruining it for everyone else. Which, by all means, criticize him for that. I'm pretty sure I did as well at the time, but I think it's a bit of a stretch for Bremner-Akins to claim that he was the reason why the premier backed down off that.
Yeah, definitely. So, what do you think the moment actually is here, and how can the Greens speak to it? Because, when looking at the stuff that's being talked about right now, it's a lot of things about, how do you grow the economy rapidly, like rescale in a way that's less trade dependent with the US and all of that. And, none of those are real green strengths on it. On the social front, there's been some retrenchment on issues around public order, public safety, the drug crisis, all of that. But if anything, the public mood has shifted away from where the Green Party naturally sits on that. So what actually is the moment, and how do you fit it into a party brand structure that seems either offside or unable to speak to the issue?
Yeah, well, I think a big thing is that, and this is, I'll even admit that I've fallen into this. Green parties often spend a lot of time just describing what's wrong, and that is something that most people now understand. You don't need to tell people that the economy is hard for people who don't make enough money. I know that because I live it. I think one thing they really need to do is get away from just describing the problems over and over again. We sort of hope immediately, right from the get-go, that you understand the problems. And if you don't, then you shouldn't be the leader of a political party. I think where they really need to speak to British Columbians in a way that they'll resonate with them is that they need to start talking about what solutions they have access to and actually can implement in a way that's going to help people. Because even when Green parties have presented solutions, it's usually, here's a research report that said this might help if we did this, and then they turn to the government and say, you should implement this. I don't really want to hear what the NDP should do better. I want to hear what the Greens are going to do better. And they can't just be a critical, yelling at the party in power if they want to grow. That's fine if they only want 2 seats and they just want to be in the back of the legislature criticizing and sort of throwing out, this is what's wrong. But if they really want to grow and form a larger caucus and ideally, a government, that should be the goal of most political parties, they need to be able to demonstrate that they can find the solutions and implement them and see tangible results for people, and then be able to communicate that back to people. Like, here's what we've done, here's what we're accomplishing, here's how that's going to make your life better. Because I think right now people are not interested in the nuances of the philosophy behind green movements. They're interested in how can you make my life better in a time period when most people feel that things are getting worse.
Yeah, I think there's a lot to that. I'll also point out that was basically what BC United did, is they just pointed out all the things that the NDP weren't doing well, but never put together anything that resembled and this is what we'll do about it in a way that came close to connecting with people. And we saw where they ended up.
Yep. I mean, like,
But
I don't agree with the removal of the carbon tax, but boy, was that a clean, consistent, easy to understand message. We're going to remove this tax. It'll save you this much money.
yeah, and the Conservatives did a good job with that, and several of their other pitches at least come in the form of problem. Here's our proposed thing we're going to do about it. Even if you don't necessarily agree with a lot of it.
Well, and you can see the train of thought behind it too. Like, you can see, okay, yeah, like, they understand that we have taxes. They understand that you can remove one. They understand that then people will pay less money. Though in British Columbia, suddenly losing that reimbursement off the tax return sucked. But, it was really easy to explain to people how to actually implement that change. Talking about, like, we're one of the things I've seen, like, we're going to implement a 4-day work week. That's been a Green Party position for a while. That's something the previous leader really pushed on. And every time I hear that, I go, how? How are you going to do that? Because that is a complicated thing. Like, how are you going to put that in law? How are you going to incentivize it? How are you going to penalize it? Is there any, like, where is the plan for that? And they say, oh no, it's just the right thing to do. Honestly, I've worked in places that have 4-day work weeks, and sometimes it's great and people work collaboratively well. Sometimes it just means everyone takes Friday off and nothing gets done on that day. And if it's implemented in that way, then it's a failure, because that's not actually helping people. That's just piling up more work to come back to on Monday.
Yeah. The one thing I'm a little curious on this, though, is the problem entirely about coming up with, like, an effective solution to sell? I know, like, we like to talk about policy, the Slack where everyone chats about politics, often very policy focused, but for, like, the average person, it often doesn't register too much. It's not, like, the sort of thing that really grabs people's attention, and does seem like in modern politics, attention is as important as anything else. And I'm not even sure where the Greens have the opportunity to grab attention. Like, what would that look like here?
Yeah, actually, I think
on there.
I'll have to scale back my nerdiness and excitement about policy. I actually think policy is probably the least important thing for the next leader to deal with. I think the most important thing is they need to start building the organization of the Green Party. Because so far, at this point, like, and it's been this way for a while, maybe it's always been this way, but the Green Party is mostly a brand. And you can work with that brand, you can promote that brand, but when it comes down to a campaign, if you don't have people that can go out and identify your voters, make sure they show up to vote, get your message out to the doorsteps, at the very least, like leaving pamphlets, you're not going to win the votes. And if you can't mobilize that kind of organization, build and mobilize that kind of organization, then how are you going to run a government? And this used to be something that I would often put to politicians, usually as like a leading question, because I don't have the answer either. But like, if you can't, how are you going to build this organization so you can demonstrate that you could recruit the staff and the ministerial assistants and the deputy ministers to run an entire government? Because if you can't recruit 93 candidates to run for election, good luck staffing the public service.
Is that what the Green Party wants, though?
And that's maybe the big question is, does the party actually want to be a political party, or do they want to be a think tank?
Well, not only that, there's also do you want to do, like, the nitty-gritty of politics, some of that being the organizational work that's required. Some of it is you kind of have to throw some elbows every now and then on stuff, and it's sometimes you have to pick and choose your battles on what you want to talk about and beat the occasional retreat from politically unpopular things that you may really believe in, but if you forefront that, you are just not going to get anywhere with people. And I'm not sure if the BC Green Party wants to be that. I'm not sure if any of the Green parties want to be that. see the same thing happening with the federal NDP. I mean, that might be the one that's like most obvious because they do get the attention a little more, but like same debate goes on there where like just looking at it from the outside, I don't necessarily think they ever want to be government because being government means having to make tough choices, and it's a lot easier sitting in the third or fourth party seats in parliament or the legislature, pointing out everything the people who are making the tough choices are doing wrong without ever having to take the responsibility for figuring out how you'd actually solve those problems where there is no good solution. There's only various bad ones.
Yeah, and I would I don't want to out any conversations I've had with people, but in my years with the Green Party, that was a regular debate that people had of whether or not the party should be an actual political party or was solely running for office to ensure that these things were talked about during an election. And I very much fell on the side of, if we're not planning to form a government, then why are we even here? But there were people who fundamentally disagreed with that, who believed that the role of the party should be to be an avenue for outsiders to speak truth to power, but ultimately not be the decision maker and not be accountable for those decisions. And that always frustrated me because I wanted to see the party be an actual party that could, form a coalition and bring people together and govern from a particular philosophy that I think would be healthy for the province. And there were people who really did not want the party to go that direction. And I would say that, you're right about a lot of Green parties feeling that way. And I think for some time lately, that has been the Green Party's way of operating in British Columbia, is that they're not aiming for government. They're not aiming to be the decision makers. And that is maybe why it ends up being frustrating when they have great ideas and don't mobilize around them, because they're not trying to. And I'm maybe projecting a bit of my hopes of seeing a government that governs from a bit of a different philosophical place than, say, the NDP or the BC Liberals or BC Conservatives now were offering. And not getting it from the Green Party. That's not actually what they were working towards.
Well, in that general vein, what do you think the leadership race so far says about kind of where the party is headed? Do you think any of the candidates are going to be choosing one path or the other? Is it still kind of all in the vein where you don't really want to pre-commit to anything?
It's hard to say. Like if I did get a chance to ask them, and maybe you will put this to them, but like I would actually ask them, like, is that what you envision for the Green Party? Like, do you see it as a coalition that can form a government with enough seats to make decisions in the legislature, or, are you going to be more on the outside looking in? And I don't actually know how the three of them would answer that. I think they'd probably say that they want to form a government, but if you actually drilled down and asked follow-up questions, you might find that the follow-up questions sort of reveal that maybe that's not actually their goal. Maybe they're really just trying to push certain issues forward as leader and having that platform and being a part of the debates. I think that was a bit of the difference between the two previous leaders. For all his faults, I think Weaver really did try to make the party bigger than it was. And I think Firstino very much tried to make the party about the issues she wanted to put forward. And so you kind of saw a bit of that difference. And, one of them tripled their vote share and one of them halved it.
Yeah, I think the issue with that one was that the issue she was one to talk about weren't always the issues that British Columbians were caring the most about at any one time.
Yeah, it was a very academic kind of issues, and honestly, bread and butter still really matters to people. Like I say that for myself too. Like when I talk to candidates and I really do want to get to know them, I want to know, do they know the people that they're seeking to represent? Are they gonna deliver for the people who are struggling in their community? Do they even understand who's struggling in their community? And if they don't, then I tend not to be impressed, even if they're with a party I like.
Well, any final thoughts on the Green Party leadership race before we pivot to touch on kind of a couple of stories from the past week?
I think for the most part, the interesting time period for that's going to be in September, and in the lead up to September 24th is the day that the results will be announced. If you are a Green Party member, you have until midnight or 11:59 on September 23rd to vote. Vote, please, and then we'll see what the membership decides. And I'm not a member anymore, so I'm not voting. So no one's trying to earn my vote. But I will be interested in seeing what happens, and I depending on who wins, it might set a different direction than the party has been on so far. Hopefully, a better one for them.
Well said. I don't have a great segue out of that, but yeah, we'll just switch over to kind of covering a couple of stories from the past week. I think the big one in BC is the ruling that came out. Is it Friday? I believe. Friday of this past week regarding the indigenous title that the Cowichan Nation sought in Richmond, which interestingly I did not realize that their historic territory covered the other side of the Salish Sea from the island. But yeah, in the ruling, the judge found that, I believe it's about 800 acres in Richmond along the Fraser River there fell under Aboriginal title belonging to them. But I think perhaps the thing that has been the most discussed and talked about here is that in the ruling also indicated that fee simple title, the type of land ownership that pretty much everyone thinks about, of you just exchange money with the other owner and then you get the title to it, it might not be valid in areas with Aboriginal title, and that has some pretty significant implications for, well, land ownership by anyone in the province.
Yeah, I was reading. So I'll admit right away, I'm a white dude from a small town, so my expertise on Indigenous rights and title is limited. But I did try to read through a bit of the ruling earlier, and I thought it was.
It's about 800 pages, so I'm guessing you.
I skimmed.
Yeah.
One of the things that was interesting is that it made it very clear that that fee simple ruling was not something the Cowichan tribes had requested. They had not tried to claim title over the private property. The judge said that based on the rest of all of this, that they do have a title claim over it. So it was the judge that made that decision. Cowichan has even said since, like, we're not, we're contesting this particular land where they have demonstrated that they had a summer village that they went to and that they fished from. And that's what they want to claim.
Yeah, most of the land in question was either City of Richmond or federal crown land there.
Yeah.
But some of the area included were fee simple lots.
Yeah. And so that they're aiming for that. I think, like, there's so much complication around Indigenous rights and title, and it's trying to kind of put a star into a circle-shaped hole where people are trying to assign the concept of ownership to a place where people would have gone during the summer, and the river would have been shared. That's Musqueam's argument, has been that, that land was shared willingly, but that Musqueam was actually the ones who had the authority to delegate, sharing.
They were one of the parties involved here and opposed the claim, and their argument was that the Cowichan people would ask permission to use the land in their territories.
Yeah,
which are covered under this. So that's its own complicated thing, and will no doubt continue to be fought over.
Yeah, well, and one of the things that I only skimmed it, but as I was reading through, was one of the things that they were looking for proof was proof of violence. Proof that they had exerted power to show that they owned that land by being violent against people coming in. Well, it sounds like for the most part people were quite collaborative. You came, you spent time in your summer village. The Musqueam and Cowichan do have like close connections. They have very similar languages. they have similar roots, and so like it sounds like they really shared that land, and that is now a problem for determining who the single only title owner is under a colonial structure of courts and legalese and title. And of course, all of this is off historical records and oral histories, and it just reading through it, I just went, this is so complex that we're trying to again put a star into a circle-shaped hole. The other thing that really stood out for me was that when the Attorney General was interviewed about it, and in her statement, because they are going to challenge it, they're going to appeal the decision, she repeatedly kept saying that, you know, the proper avenue for this is the treaty system. You know, they should be negotiating treaties. Well, the Cowichan tribes and the Hulkamelium group has been involved in the treaty process since 1993. And they've been working through that process for 26 years. They only filed this lawsuit in 2014. And that has already been ruled, you know, gone through it was like 500 something days of trial, gone through the court system. There's a ruling. I'm guessing even the appeal is going to be done before that treaty process is finished. And so to sort of redirect them back to, oh, you should be going through this treaty process. Well, it's been 26 years of that process. Like, I'm not surprised they decided to try another avenue to see if that moved faster. It did move faster.
Yeah, it's all just so incredibly complicated on there. So this came out Friday. The Attorney General pretty much first thing Monday said they were going to be appealing this one. The primary thing they're vocalizing their concern about is the fee simple issue, which makes a lot of sense as a thing to focus on the appeal on, because when you put that into question, it basically shakes the entire foundation of the property system in BC and has huge potential implications for the province's economy. Like, it's gonna, if this thing goes forward as is and that precedent gets built on, potentially, you know, almost every lot in the province has questionable ownership. The ability to get mortgages and purchase property is going to be in question. Economic investment has a chance to dry up in a situation of legal uncertainty, which, you know, with everything going on, is literally the last thing the province needs right now. And yeah, it's just a really messy issue, because there was obviously an injustice done in the past, but there's such a built-up set of reliance interests now that anything that starts to unweave it just becomes, at the very least, impractical, if not harmful in its own ways, if not done with like the most extreme care, that you're stuck with kind of bad situation no matter what. And it's would probably be in like the overall province's interest to get that fee simple thing pulled out of it, but whether that happens on appeals a whole other question. And if it doesn't, like, that opens up some real challenges for the province.
Yeah, well, and of course I wonder, like, is the system that we've set up of home ownership and title, like, is it fundamentally flawed? Like, was it, well, and this gets into the much more meta level debate of, like, what happened in the 17 and 1800s, and like, was that enough of an injustice that our system is not legitimate? And it's certainly people who believe that. I've gone down that rabbit hole myself, and I think there's some pretty big questions there that I do not have the expertise to answer. But like, when I was reading through, even just skimming, like, there is deep historical knowledge and injustice. There were promises made. There were declarations that, you know, we would work collaboratively, you know, we would share the land, and then we move to a system where, you know, there is one owner that is the only owner, and that is determined by the government. And I sometimes wonder if reconciliation is just not compatible with some of our system the way it's set up. And I don't know what the outcome of that is going to be, but I do think that those are the questions that people are going to start having to answer, especially governments. If they have the right to grant a parcel of land to an individual, or do they have that right? Like, do they fundamentally have the right to grant a parcel of land that was stolen by a government, going against their own word, to then a private individual? And that's a question that will most certainly, if it comes up, go all the way to the Supreme Court before we get an answer. But it is the question that seems to be bubbling. Like, how legitimate is the Canadian system at this point?
Yeah, but like at the same time, when it's been several generations, properties changed hand multiple times. You also don't want to create a situation where the person who's in good faith, thinking the title was valid and everything, put in some cases millions of dollars, at the very least a six-figure amount of money to purchase a property, took on huge debts to do so.
Yep.
You kind of don't want to pull the rug out from under them too. Like it's just messy, but like at some point there's just like so much built up reliance on it that like if you start pulling at that, like the balance of equities like doesn't necessarily work out in the way that would necessarily be compatible with going back to address those previous historic injustices. Like it's just becomes a huge challenge on that front. And one where like there might not be a way to actually square the circle where everyone can end up ultimately getting justice out of this one.
Yeah, that's like, as the Attorney General kept saying, like, we can go through the treaty process and protect private rights. I kind of just went, do you really believe that? Like, is that actually what you think the treaty process is going to lead to? Because, okay, good luck.
Yeah, but and like, if it does ultimately go to the Supreme Court and the Supreme Court rules in a way that is detrimental to the fee simple thing, like just blowing up the property system and like depriving like most of society of the largest assets, like that's the sort of thing that leads to like huge societal strife and problems. And like, I don't know. This is just one thing where we're going to have to watch it, because no matter how it plays out, it's going to be hugely consequential.
Yes, very much. Well, and we have one political party who their entire focus is Indigenous rights are illegitimate. So we can expect to hear lots about that in the legislature when it resumes in October. I'm referring to the small party, not one of the big ones. 1BC is who I'm talking about.
The 1BC.
Just to be clear here, in case someone thought I was talking about someone else. 1BC is who I'm talking about.
Yeah, I mean, I could guess where the Conservatives are going to land on this, which is probably somewhere between not going as far as to say it's illegitimate, but that it needs to be a secondary priority to preserving the property rights of British Columbians, which is kind of my guess on how they're going to end up when this gets back to the legislature and really becomes the big issue of the fall.
I think that's more or less what Rustad said. I think his position was the government must appeal this. And now they're appealing it.
And speaking of appeals, there was a decision of the Ontario Court of Appeals this week regarding the constitutionality of first past the post, where I think unsurprisingly, if I'm going to editorialize a little bit, the pro-proportional representation side lost, and ultimately the judge ruled that there is no constitutional right to a particular way to count the vote.
Yeah, no surprise on that one. I'm someone who very much supports proportional representation. I do think it's a better system. I think it's a direction that we should go, but I am immensely frustrated sometimes with the arguments that are just repackaging the same our system's not fair in different wording and not really moving the issue forward. And this kind of feels like that's what this particular court case was to say, oh, we don't think the system's fair, and therefore it's violating the charter. And I don't think there's a fundamental. I don't think that the system fundamentally has to be fair. I think everyone needs to have an equal right to participation to it, but fairness is not the metric of whether or not a system is working. And I think our system of first past the post very much is working the way it was designed. It was designed to give local regions a voice at the table, which it accomplishes. Ultimately those people will sit and caucus with a group of people that is their party. We happen to put those parties on the ballot in advance, so you know exactly which party that they're going to caucus with if you send them to Ottawa. But we are still ultimately in a system where we are electing a representative for our region to be the voice of our region. And in that sense, the system is working the way it was set up, working the way it was intended. And I think the argument, if you want to change it, can't be, oh, the system sucks because the party I want to win isn't winning. It has to be that there is a better way of doing this, and here is how to do it. And here is why it's better, and it's not because my favorite party is going to win, it's because all these other reasons.
Yeah, well said. There's, I think, a problem generally of trying to take issues where there are going to be disagreements. I mean, we've had how many proportional representation referendums now, and it's hasn't won one of them. I mean, one of the ones where they set the threshold at 60% and it got between 50 and 60. Yeah, there's an argument there. But the last several after that have all been less than 50%. There's a clear case that the people have spoken on this one and they're kind of fine with it. Like you said, there's a logic to the system and it prioritizes some things over others, which is true of any system, no matter what method of counting the votes. You're not going to be able to achieve all possible outcomes with one, and that ultimately means you're going to have to decide which things are important and which things aren't, and that's the sort of thing that should belong to the political process for debate and get hashed out that way, not trying to squint and read into the Constitution a preferred outcome, which happens a lot in Canada, and I think our democratic culture is poor for it.
Yeah.
And we need to stop trying to solve big issues via court cases. We need to actually get better at figuring out how to get outcomes through the political system.
Yeah, I think one of the problems, particularly with some of the advocacy groups around it, is that they're not building a consensus for a better system. And going the court route is it's almost playing their hand, where they're trying to have our system currently declared illegitimate, but they're not actually bringing people along with them. They're not convincing the general public to support a shift to proportional representation. They're trying to convince the courts. And what we saw a referendum in British Columbia. There was, people went out and had a convoluted question and different systems proposed, and there was no consensus on what we wanted to achieve, and so ultimately it failed. Of course it failed. Even I was looking at it being I want to support this, but I don't really. And so, whereas, I think we have changed our voting system in British Columbia before. We had ranked ballots at one point, and that's how we got SOCREDs. We've had dual member ridings right up until the 90s. We had multiple people representing a single area, and you could have different people, or a person from two different parties representing one area. That was a way of proportionality. So our system can be changed, but it needs to be coming from a place of we want to make the system better, not this entire thing's illegitimate. We should just, I always hate the idea when people say it's broken. It's not. It's not broken. It's working the way it was intended. Broken would be if we voted for a local representative and then someone else, say from like across the country, became our representative instead. That would be broken. The system is working the way it should. I'd like it to be better. Where's the argument for how we improve it or change it to better represent what people want? And not just electing one or two more people from a small party, because even as someone who worked for the Greens, like, you can win in first past the post as a Green. There are ways to do it. I've worked on those campaigns. It's not the system that's the barrier. It's a whole bunch of other things, but like, you can navigate that system. If you have a proportional system, you're still going to be a small party that has not as much influence. You want to have more of a voice, you got to build that voice, and that involves bringing people in, building a consensus, building organization, being able to reach each other during an election. You can't just yell at the courts, declare this unconstitutional.
Yeah, the fact that we've changed over like which party is represented in certain parts of the spectrum every now and then, says that small parties do have a chance of coming up and becoming successful in first past the post. And yeah, on the North thing, I guess I'm just getting even on cases where like I agree with the substantive outcome in a lot of cases, I'm just getting increasingly concerned that too much of the decision making is going on in the courts. You can take the recent Ontario bike lane case. I think bike lanes are good. Kind of think the decision on whether or not there should be bike lanes ultimately rests with the elected government, not the courts. Kind of the similar thing here, and that we ultimately need to get back to having the politicians and people putting forward political arguments to get there on this stuff, because the road of going down where courts decide everything ends in bad places, because it may work for a short time, a couple decades or so, but the longer that goes on, the more the composition of the court becomes the battleground, and you can just look at the states and see how that goes poorly.
Yeah, I was about to say the United States is a pretty good example where if you're solely relying on the judiciary, well, even a judiciary can be manipulated. Whereas, I think the gap is we're not really talking to each other anymore about issues. Like, something comes up and you want to see change, and then you go yell in an election, this is what I want to see changed. You lose elections, so you go to the courts and yell, argue that it should be changed. But people aren't going and knocking on doors and saying, hey, you know what? This is something that matters really deeply to me. I would like to see this changed. Is there a way I could engage you on that? Or going to events, or like, I sort of am nostalgic for the days when I'd go to a fall fair and there'd be political parties out talking about the things they cared about. They don't even show up anymore. Like, that was how that's how you bring people along with you. You include them as part of the conversation. You share your ideas with them. You hear feedback and you incorporate that and change, your pitch. And I think we've really, social media really took away the actual human part of policy making and meaningful change.
Yeah, that's a big problem. And I guess my final thought on this will be, in addition to the social media stuff you laid out, like, Constitution should not be the framework in which all problems are solved. It should outline the general parameters, but trying to constitutionalize policy is ultimately a pretty poor way to run things. Ironically, I think voting system is probably, of the various things we've talked about, the one that actually can sit most well into a constitutional thing, but that should very much be an amendment, not a court decision on that one. But ultimately, constitutional law should not be the way we solve everyday policy problems in the country.
Yeah. Like, I often, the one that was constitutional that is dear to my heart was the same-sex marriage debate. But ultimately, the court didn't rule that same-sex marriage had to be allowed. It ruled that excluding people was an infringement on people's rights. And then it was the political system that actually implemented marriage itself. The court gave a direction and said, hey, there's a conflict between the law and the stated constitution, but it was, at the end of the day, actually, like, it was a government on there was even a single vote margin that moved it forward, but it was the government that actually implemented it. And I think we need to remember that, like, the courts are there to give guidance and interpretation of the laws, but we need those democratic systems to actually implement them.
Well said. Well, I think we've come up to time on this one. Ryan, it's great to have you on the pod, and thanks for joining me tonight.
Thanks for the invitation, and I really appreciate the time. It's fun to talk.
Yeah, I don't think we actually mentioned this, but we'll be, although you alluded to it, but next week we'll be talking to the Green Party candidates, so look forward to those interviews in next week's show.
I will be listening.
Okay. And yeah, once again, thanks for joining us. You want to shout out your Substack?
Yes,
to the listeners?
So I try to write weekly. So if you're interested in following the written word instead of a podcast, my Substack is itsryanclayton.substack.com, and the Substack is called Shot of Rye. So hopefully, if you're interested in getting an email from me once a week of a variety of issues, I've got one coming up about the financial disclosures. I do have a bit of a deep dive into the BC Green leadership race coming up. And sometimes it's just me talking about pop culture because it's my blog. I can write whatever I want.
Right. We'll throw a link to that in the show notes.
Great. Thanks.
And that has been Politicos. Find links to everything we talked about at politicos.ca. Support the show and get access to our exclusive Slack channel at patreon.com/politicos. Our intro music is Beautiful British Columbia by Serge Plotnikov. Politicos is a production of Leg and Boot Media. Audio editing provided by Jesse Woodward at listener-supported CHLY 101.7 FM in Nanaimo. Learn more at chly.ca.